The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is the Agile Coaching Network. I have missed this call, having been away throughout December, so I'm glad that we're back together. This is brought to you by Agile Alliance. If you don't know who the Agile Alliance is, go to agilealliance.org. It's a nonprofit organization that's been supporting Agile and Agile adoptions for, over a decade now. What we do at this call is that we have a group of people coming together and having discussions about Agile and Agile adoptions. So with that, we're going to get started like we normally do with the Agile Narrative Project. And this time we're going to be looking at a particular story about Agile adoptions being called done when they're not done. And the story goes, can we stop calling it done? Overall, it's crazy to declare your Agile adoption is done, especially when your company is far from being completed. And it's been twice now, and we've let our coaches go, but we still need help. This is a story of concern. They consider it to be quite common, and it's about avoiding change. The person we're having their manager read this story, they believe that their manager would be in strong disagreement. Middle management would be 100% disagreement, and their executives would disagree as well. So would anyone like to give a start to talking about how we can take such stories and how can we dampen this from occurring in the future?
There is a point where it is really done for needing an outside coach, but only if they have brought in and or taken from their existing staff people that they have trained who are knowledge seekers that would continue to communicate and work with organizations like this one and keep growing their knowledge and keep helping teams as they, as a team changes, you have to keep always changing. So if they're not keeping somebody within the company that has grown coaching skills during that time, I definitely think it's crazy to let go of the coaches. But I do think a company can bring in somebody as a permanent employee to fill that role as a Scrum Master or coach that helps the teams.
Right. So you think that within the perspective of being able to gain enough knowledge internally where it's now sort of self-supporting, then this might be an okay move, but it's when they're doing it too early, when there's too many knowledge gaps.
Right.
Do it.
They don't have the people put in place, and maybe that's where they're lacking with the Agile coaches are coaching the teams and not really developing new coaches.
Right. So developing that internal capability. John, what do you think?
Hi, I'm going to throw a curveball in here. So I would even argue that it's not really about the company's end goal to be agile. I mean, that's not really the point. It's really more about what they want to do as an organization and how they can leverage agile to get there. So if they're not accomplishing what they need as far as their goals, then I think that's really the bigger question.
Sure. And I've seen this quite a bit where, a number of companies will set Agile as the destination. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the wrong perspective. It is definitely the wrong perspective. It's what business goals are we trying to go achieve? And Agile is one way that we can go get there. So when you're saying from a goal perspective, what would you say would be balanced goals in this particular case that would be okay to let your coaches go?
Well, I kind of liken it to just any sports analogy. I mean, you're still going to have a need for coaches and Scrum Masters, probably not as much as you would initially, but there's always going to be a need. I mean, At some point, the focus has to turn away from teams and process to helping the organizational issues.
Sure, it just continues to grow into other areas. Philip, what do you have?
Yeah, this is an instant challenge. I've experienced this a few times. I find usually it's really comes down to what the organization has defined as their agile adoption journey they want to go on. Because really, agile is a journey, not a destination. Mm-hmm. So it should forever be evolving, moving forward and changing as the organization, as the marketplace changes. And I've certainly found that quite often the definitions a company uses are very, very lightweight, and they can quite easily, quickly say, yes, we've done. We're now an agile enterprise or an organization using agile processes and behaviors, when in many ways the people on the shop floor doing the work are still using a sort of hybrid mixture of waterfall behaviors and everything else. They're saying the right words. They're talking about the agile ceremonies, but the actual behaviors and the philosophies they're adopting is still quite often waterfall. But because organizations can label it as being agile, it seemed to be successful.
Right. And I've noted a number of enterprises where they've made the declaration and they said, we've achieved these goals that we were trying to go off and achieve with Agile. And the first emergency comes up and they all go back to those waterfall ways. It's sort of have a fire drill on a nuclear submarine. They do those things so that to see whether or not the training has sunk in. But, and
that's true. If a company starts using the term hybrid, they're not truly becoming agile.
Oh, we use little a agile, not big A agile. What are you talking about?
Yes, that's right. Let's play with all these words to get them to mean what we want it, make us look good.
Exactly. Is there anyone else that want to kind of dive into this question a little bit deeper, or do we want to go to the core questions that other people have asked online? John, did you have another thing to add to this?
No, I'm good.
So the top question up here, and this is one that I've heard multiple times across my coaching career, which is, I'm seeing a trend of story points being used as time estimates, which is, 8 points equals 1 week, rather than relative estimation. How can coaches change this mindset? Does anyone want to take a first stab at this?
Yeah, so this really, really bothers me big time. I mean, I think I'll just go flat out and say it's dishonest when people are doing that. I think it started with somebody who didn't understand it, but happened to be in that job and then started introducing this because they didn't understand how do you go from, our team did 20 points worth of work. And what does that mean in terms of hours? They just didn't know how to do that in the very first sprint or iteration. So they just started doing that. It's a very simple concept. A story is the smallest unit of work you implement, and a story point is a way to measure the size of that work. And the size of the work translates to time once you finish doing the work and you measure how much time it took. And So these are techniques to use. This is a planning technique. It's a tool for managers and leaders to utilize. And it's not about you want to look at an average of what a story point, just look at your past history of last sprint and the previous one and the one before that, and you will get a number. But that number is only historically useful to plan for future. And this whole notion of 1 point equals 8 hours is bogus, is bunkum, dishonest, and it's hurting so many companies.
Yes.
Yeah.
John and Philip, you have your hand up. You go ahead and dive in when you're ready.
Sure. Hey, this is John. This is a question that I'm sure a lot of us have experience with. It kind of leads into people asking how much does a story point cost, and I get where the question comes from. It's generally how it's coming from a place of, well, we need reports, we need to figure out how much money we're going to spend, and I get that. Kind of the question I usually ask is, what if story points were optional? What if we're not even using them? How can we get that same information without story points? And you usually get back with, well, they're required, you have to have them. But it's really about figuring out ways you can show people together that same information without all the overhead of a planning poker session. I think it was mentioned earlier, we talk about how long it's going to take to get things done. We talk about cycle time, talk about velocity, but it's really try to alleviate their actual problem that they're trying to solve with getting some report. So it's that's kind of where I see it going.
Well, what I find is that, number one, humans are horrible at time estimates. They just, and I'm the same way. Someone tells me, how long is that going to take? And, I think it's going to take me a couple hours. And then, a couple hours later, it's going to take me a few more hours and so on. And that whole notion of talking about the complexity of something and then using the total brain of the organization or the total brain of the team to kind of balance that out with the complexity of the particular task, and then looking back in retrospect rather than trying to go reach too far forward. Philip, what do you have?
Yeah, I mean, as everybody said, we've all experienced these sort of questions before. I think a lot of it as well depends on the culture of the organization. Developers find this the hardest thing to move to from time estimates to story points. And I think a lot of it is their fear about being blamed. If they say the wrong number, they get blamed if it's not correct. So I think a lot of it is being able to work in a safe environment, and explain to them this is all about relative sizing. It's not an absolute. It's just at this moment in time, how big is this piece of work from a sort of perspective of the effort you need to put into it, but also its risk as well. And it's all about saying every project is individual, is different. You can't compare one to the other. But the starting point is determine for this project what you think is a medium piece of work. And we'll call a medium piece of work a 5. And then we'll just compare it. And other stories will just compare to that baseline story. Is it bigger or is it smaller? If it's bigger, how much bigger is it going to be? Mm-hmm. And get people to understand that it's a guide and not an absolute. And it helps us determine how much work we can feasibly get done in an iteration or sprint, and we'll refine it as we go along. We'll get better and better and better at doing this. And I think as long as you explain to people, say they're not going to be blamed if things are wrong, that we don't estimate it correctly, I think over time, certainly my experience is it's pull people along where it becomes second nature after a while.
Yes. And Michelle, what do you have?
So I think it's sometimes good to talk about accuracy versus precision and what our goals are. And I found that when I have a team that hasn't done any kind of story pointing, to take it out of something that they're comfortable into an area where they're comfortable with, use story point cards to compare relatively, how difficult it is to peel a grape versus peel a banana versus peel an orange or peel an apple. And then they can see that we're not looking at time, we're looking at relative difficulty in this arena. And then going through a full pointing exercise with something that they can relate to, they can usually start lining up, say 6 tasks, try to find one that they believe to be a center and work from there relatively.
Right. So what you're saying is you really need to, in order to change the mindset, you need to really walk people through the process more effectively and sort of help them to visualize it a little bit better.
Yeah, and to something that they're not comfortable with, because I work on a team where I'm from a kind of a conservative organization where, we're functionally siloed. So a cross-functional team means a strictly database person who's only done database stuff can be on a team with developers. So I try to give a context for that team to work outside of that they're all comfortable with, that they don't start arguing over, minutia or really detailed items like I'm the database developer, so I know this versus you. So to give them a context to understand pointing as kind of a concept and then move to work.
Right. No, I fully agree with that. That sounds like a great approach.
A lot of the points they have brought up I think are very good, but I think often a team is working agilely with the points, and it's not the team themselves so much that's trying to see those points as a unit of time measure. And often for some very good reason. Your salesperson may be needing to let a client know about how long they're going to work for this special custom development or something of that type. So while I don't really want the team to not understand, nor the people that are stakeholders not to understand, 8 points could be because we think it's a 3 points worth of effort, but there's so much unknown once we get in there that it might end up being much more complex, so that they can't guarantee a week is an 8 point. But to understand that for some people, they have to look and say, well, if your 8 points is going to be done in a sprint, then I can kind of guess that in 2 weeks I'll have that item. And I think the biggest is that trust piece. I can't remember which one of the speakers brought that up, but is that there's enough trust within the organization that they can say that people are estimating to the best of their ability and not hold them accountable where it docks them in their job, or that they're conceived as being incompetent in their work and their estimating.
I was a part of an organization where, for whatever reason, there was this conflation that occurred between this word commitment and this word or planning and estimating. And for whatever reason, we would go through a planning exercise, and just because based on the knowledge that we had during the planning, we thought it was going to be approximately this size or this long to go off and deliver, and we would have this notoriously the scenario of it took longer. And the question is how do you treat somebody when it doesn't come true as expected, because maybe we learned something new as we started digging into it, or the opposite extreme, which was accidental success, where we actually got it done quicker than we expected. And how do we treat people there as well? And I think it all wrappers right back around to the word of, what we're doing. It's an estimate. And I think it's going to take this long. And until we dig into it, sometimes we don't know.
Can I add one more thing?
Please. Okay.
So I think one aspect that almost never gets discussed, and we haven't discussed even today, is, one of the core things in Agile is time and money are fixed, and scope is flexible, and we realize that, we acknowledge that. In Waterfall, you pretend that somehow scope can be fixed, and so can time and money at the same time. And so the key reason we use user stories is so that we can define a valuable unit of requirement that can be implemented end-to-end within a sprint comfortably. The INVEST acronym, right? It's independent, small, verifiable, estimable, and so on. So if a story is too big, the product management skill requires you adjust the scope so that the story is comfortably capable of being done in that sprint. If it is too complex, if it's too big, then as a product owner, product manager, own it. Figure out how to simplify it so that you can get something built in that sprint. And it's not really about time. It's really about, can we do these stories together in the sprint so that we can add value at the end of the sprint if we ship this to our customer.
So one thing that I've done as well is, and this is the question back to the management of needing some sort of time estimate. We have actually created on a wall, we would put up user stories that we've done before in the past, and we would put, the number of story points that it represented, and you can go put some average times of what the throughput through the factory was. But one of the things that you always have to be cautious of, and I think someone mentioned this earlier, is that for me, the complexity of something new might be incredibly high, meaning that my Fibonacci number that I'll give out will be high because I don't have the domain knowledge. And it might, in fact, take me longer to go off and do that work, which is okay because it's understandable because of just my approach. And over time, and my knowledge increases, I would expect that number of what it took to go create that thing to be less. The Fibonacci number would be lower itself. Did anyone else have anything else to add to this, or do we want to go pivot to the next question?
Anytime somebody asks you the question or asks us the question, how much time will it take? They're not understanding Agile. You should never have to ask the question, how long will this take? The answer is always 2 weeks or 1 week, whatever the length of your sprint. So we will be done at the end of the sprint, and we will show you what we have built. And we will kind of, if you want to, calculate the average amount of time per story point. But that's just an academic of interest, and it's a planning tool, as I already talked about earlier.
Sure. Ron, you raised your hand up while we were talking about that. What do you have to add?
Yeah, I kind of agree with the idea of, looking back historically on what, if you wanted to look at averages in terms of what a certain rating on a story or sizing was. But actually, if they're hung up on the number itself, the story points, maybe it's time to step away from the numbers. And I think everybody's pretty familiar with the notion of using T-shirt sizing. But typically, T-shirt sizing just focuses on how big it is, which implies how much time. So maybe you make a greater distinction between that and say maybe a small T-shirt is actually like just one of those sleeveless muscle man shirts. And then the next size up is one with sleeves and maybe a design. The next one might be a button-down shirt. The next one might be a dress shirt. And the next one might be a sport coat or something like that. So it implies not only sizing changes, but also complexity in there. And then once they kind of figure out what their baseline is, then, they compare them between the different values or different t-shirt or shirt types. And then they can have a scale that's, if it's this size, it's this many points, and discuss less about the points and just kind of get the general notion of the difference between them in terms of the type of shirt and the size.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we actually used animal sizes, an elephant versus a mouse, that way people could get that visualization of that sizing is absolutely a good case. But notoriously, as that people still pull back through to try to go equate it to a number. And over the industry, I've noticed we still go back into trends where this tends to occur. And I think someone made the earlier point that there still is some form of time estimate that people are trying to go pull back to. And I think one of the summary items that we could take from this is that notion that we work in two-week sprints, or we work in 3-week sprints, or whatever that time frame is, and we have a high degree of confidence because of the team's skill and the retrospectives that we look at of being able to size effectively, that we know that we can produce one elephant every sprint, and we can produce 15 mice every sprint, and we have a good idea that that's going to come true by the end. And I think that confidence level is what we're trying to go build as coaches, is we want the people to be confident enough that when they do set that size, that it does fit within the sprint, and by the time it gets to the end, that it will come true. And then stop worrying about weeks and months and all the other types of things. Do we want to pivot to the next one? I think we should. If we want to pivot, everyone raise their hands. I want to see people raise their hands if they're paying attention. Look at this. There's some hands going up. I love it. So I'm going to go throw this one over into the archive. And how do I encourage continuous development in a company that's already doing Agile? How do we continue them to want to continue to grow?
I guess my question would be, when they say continuous development, are they talking about development of the team's skills or knowledge? If that were the case, then I would think that if the team dedicated a certain time frame in their sprints, maybe every other Friday or something like that, the team has a hack day, or they have a day where they learn something. And then one of the teams at our company actually does that. And they decide they're going to learn a new technology or experiment with it. And some of them may say, I'm going to go research this. And then at the end of the day, they do a quick little showcase to say, here's what I learned, and here's what I did, and here's a POC I created, and maybe this is something we want to put into our backlog.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
This is Tani, and our development teams also do a Hack Monday, or whatever day is the first day of every sprint. But in addition to that, one of the things that they have chosen as engineers to do themselves is, as they're learning and growing, they turn around and periodically one of them will lead a class teaching some new skill that they've learned to the other engineers in the company. And that's gone over super well. There's 50 of them, and almost everybody shows up for the trainings. And I really see a lot of effort where the one that's getting his ready for the next opportunity is actually setting up some sandbox so everybody can participate along with him and use the code that they're learning.
Would you say that person having to train that knowledge, is that helping them to develop mastery?
Oh, I definitely think so. And it's helping encourage everyone to realize there are times when we're all stumbling with a new technology or idea. And when we do our retrospectives, they are much more open to choosing as a thing to do something that really is very valuable and helpful to the team, whether that's learning how to support the testing effort more or improving on a process. I just feel like people are just really excited about learning, to the point when we did our engagement survey, they said we didn't have enough hours devoted to learning and they wanted more. So we went from doing every other sprint Hack Monday to every sprint.
That's awesome. That's a good pattern. Lisa, you had your hand up?
I was going to say something similar in that there's always opportunities for improvement on a process, pain points that a team might be feeling or an organization. And by using agile methods and introducing them to new ways of thinking about things, it helps them continue to grow in their agile journey.
What we found is we actually switched the daily stand-up question a little bit. Instead of saying, what did you do yesterday? What am I doing today? Those things. We actually asked, what did you learn yesterday? What do you want to learn today? And we strategically put in that learning word and this is sort of that safe to fail environment we were trying to go create, which was it was okay to fail, but it wasn't okay not to learn. And we wanted to make sure that was sort of reinforced in the culture.
I think you brought up something very important. If the leadership team is not making sure everyone feels that it is truly safe to fail and that people will help them get out of the failure and give them the time to learn from it, they're not going to be willing to try to keep developing their agile processes because they're only going to do what has been already approved.
Exactly. And in that environment of being able to take in that next step to implementing anything, and that's including from the product to the process that we use, that I think, at least for us, we were uncomfortable about inserting some new method. We're definitely uncomfortable about removing it if it didn't work. For whatever reason, everything felt like policy for some reason. And we had to get our mindset out of there. How about others?
Sure, this is John again. First, I want to say I love how they put already doing agile in quotes. But if we're talking about continuous development as far as releasing code, I think, at least in my experience, there's a kind of a misunderstanding about sprints. I hear quite a bit of times that they have to release each sprint, and it's kind of this association that a sprint is a release. And when we talk about continuous development, that really doesn't have anything to do with a 2 or 3 or 4 week sprint. It's really disassociating that. So it's kind of like you can release every day. The only thing you're really required to do at the end of a sprint is you talk about the progress you've made, you talk about what you've learned, and then you plan for the next iteration. So I think really instilling that mindset is where the starting point to talk about encouraging continuous development. But that's kind of really more Scrum specific. Kanban is a whole other can of worms. But yeah, that's kind of where I would start with that.
Yeah, I think sometimes people make a mistake when they're doing Kanban, is that there are certain rituals that you can do to reflect on that, which is I would notoriously put, after we get a lot of stuff in the done camp over there, and kind of borrowed the technique from Scrumban, which was, hey, maybe we should do a retrospective. We've got a lot done over there.
Yeah.
Let's have a conversation about how we're doing with all of that. I'm not sure if you've inserted those as well, so to help in those reflections.
Oh yeah, definitely. Sometimes with for a Kanban team, one of the cards would actually be a retro.
Yeah, and it's fun to put in. I've had certain times where I'll throw a card up in the backlog, and you'll have some heavy sighs, but the heavy sighs are, well, why did we? That's even another retrospect item right there. Why did you sigh when we did that? Because nobody ever responds to the retrospective when we do them. Well, okay, what do we do about that?
Yep.
Any other feedback on this one? Going once? If your hand is up, I assume that you and your microphone's enabled, you'll just dive in. If not, I'm just going to go and pivot to the next. Okay, I'm going to go pivot. Let's see. As a coach, there are many concerns that I see in the organizations implementing SAFe. Is there anything that you can caution others to be wary of? Does anyone want to kick that off? Especially if there's big advocates here about how to go address this. The silence. I love it.
I'll dive in, not as an advocate, but just to share. This is Lisa. That I think there's a need for scaled Agile, not necessarily SAFe, but some form of a scaling so that you can get the teams collaborating at a program level. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I mean, I was very fortunate to go visit Nokia and John Deere Tractor, which were the two primary companies that sort of refined release trains. The how do we take this big, huge amount of backlog and how do we sequence it effectively across multiple teams? And I thought the pattern was good. I liked and enjoyed that and saw their implementation of it, and I thought it was a really good working pattern. And then when I don't know, we're Safe 5.0 now. I'm not sure what the version is, and they started just clumping in so much stuff into it. I think my biggest wary point of it is that when patterns are not really well vetted, and I'll point to the portfolio level that's on that diagram. And I visit a lot of companies, and I've yet to find some really good companies that have a good implementation or any implementation of the top side of that structure. So I'm wary of just because it's on the diagram doesn't mean that it's really well vetted out. How about others?
So what if we look at not safe, but scaled agile in the same way we look at agile and all of the various tools under that, like Scrum and Kanban, and just say we need to look at the organization and find a way to implement something that works for them under their constraints, under their structure. I think that, and I did recently get SAFE certified, not for any reason except that I was told that it was a good thing to have, and now I've got that information in my toolbox. But I think there's a need for a generic way of doing it, but it has to be flexible, as in any other agile method, to work for the way that each organization needs it to work.
I agree with that, and we've got to the point of saying that following an ingredient versus being a chef. We needed more chefs, which is these are the ingredients that we have. How do we create a tasty, Scrum team based upon the elements that we have and mix them together in a way that fits the system that we're trying to go build? But that required our coaches to be, very fluent in how to do, human systems engineering and systems engineering to kind of bring those components together effectively and bake something custom.
Yeah, this is Ron.
Ron.
One of the things that we've talked about is, ways that we can scale what we're doing with Scrum and even teams that aren't Scrum. And so we are looking into all of the different types of scaling frameworks and not necessarily prescribing to one to the letter, but looking for what's the best of each of those and maybe coming up with our own approach that's kind of a hybrid of the different types, rather than just prescribing to one and then adhering to it 100%.
I fully agree. What we ended up having to come down to was that at different phases of our product lifecycle, which is, if I had to say, we started in sort of this opportunity phase, we went to concept, and concept rolled over into candidate, and candidate rolled over into solution, and then after solution, obsolescence. That the method that we would go pick, the frameworks and methods that we would use would vary depending on where we were at in that global life cycle. And it also had a varying degree of scrutiny depending on what product line. So if it was a piece of medical equipment, it had a higher degree of scrutiny, or something that was being sold to a banking product, a higher degree of scrutiny, or, a missile system versus a consumer-based system. It had to vary based upon need. Did you find the same thing?
Well, we've experimented with different types. Like we tried a Scrum of Scrums, but we didn't really know enough about it that time to really have it be successful. Then we've looked at using less and actually used that to kind of structure a group of teams to operate that we're going to kick off. But we're also looking at the other ones too, because there may be elements of those that actually, if we put that with using, say, less, that might actually be even better fit for for a group of teams. And it could vary depending on, which groups of teams you're trying to get to work together on a common solution. So we're experimenting, we're, testing our hypothesis and seeing what mix or what combination of things would work best for certain teams. And then can we do that with others as well?
Right. Yeah. Fully agree. So I think to summarize this, I think what we were hearing on the call is that, be wary of one method, whether it be SAFe or whether it be even Scrum. It's know the system and how it fits and how it can be integrated in effectively into your organization. And as long as it still applies with the Agile principles and values, you're probably, to use the word safe again, you're safe to kind of probe it in and see if it works for you. And don't be afraid to let it go if it's not working out for you in your organization as well. And there's plenty of other methods that are out there. We have about time for about one more question, and I'm scanning through the list of one that might be smaller, but I'll just go ahead and dive into one here that we might be able to wrap up before the top of the hour. How much Agile is the team structure versus the methods and approach? How much is it about structure versus methods and approach? Ron, you still have your microphone active. Can I pick on you?
Actually, I would say neither. We tend to focus on one or the other, and I think if we haven't got the right mindset and understand how we're trying to operate, then going through the motions of a certain approach or framework, or even how the teams are structured, is kind of like missing the point.
Right. So, Lisa, how about you? Do you have something to add to this one?
I thought that was a great answer. They're all important in different ways, but if you don't have the underlying culture and beliefs in the Agile fundamentals, then the other stuff isn't really going to work.
Would you say, though, that structure and methods and approach sometimes could inhibit how much Agile can come into the organization? I kind of flip this question a bit.
Similar to my last answer, yes, because you don't want to be that structured. You want to be flexible and make it work depending on the situation. So you can introduce those structures or those methods and different approaches, and then let the team determine what makes the most sense for them.
What's interesting is I, during December, I got to go visit ING Bank, which is implementing Agile, and went to their executive area. And typically when I see Agile adoptions, it typically is at ground level, where the development is going. But their executives were all sitting around a table in a common squad type of pattern that you would see at the team level. And I was impressed that they got rid of offices. They got rid of some structures that they had typically that were holding them apart. If you guys get a chance, I just posted that vlog, by the way, up on, it just got tweeted recently from the Agile Alliance. Go take a look at them. I was impressed what they did with spaces. And I think that affects their methods and their approach. I think it definitely had an effect on their adoption. Anyone else have something to add to this?
I agree that how the room and area is set up, when you get into a larger number of teams and there's no space for them to comfortably work in a stand-up or Scrum, meeting rooms are not available. There's, the way the floor's set up, there really isn't room for the team to gather near their desk. That physical structure impacts it. But at the same time, if you put a number of people who are very resistant to adopting Agile methods on the same team, no matter what framework you try to put around them, they're going to be fighting it. And you might find just getting attendance at a stand-up is a struggle. So I think both can be things that really impact the success of Agile in your company.
Right. I remember early on when we were talking about needing team rooms for be able to do group development, as well as just a place to have a stand-up. I remember one time an executive walked by and they were looking at this group of people who were standing out in the field, just right out the window. And they go, "What are those people doing?" And they were in a circle. And I said, "Well, I have a pretty good guess they're doing a daily stand-up." And, "Well, why are they standing out there?" Because you can't get a conference room in this place. There's no area that's big enough for them to to have 9 people stand around in a circle and talk about their work. And I thought that was sad, but this person actually walked and observed and then wanted to learn themselves. So team structure too, the other thing that I'll just point into this, and this is still an artifact with a number of companies. I am a development team member, but when I say development team, I don't include test. And I report to one manager, and I am a test team member, and I report to a test manager. And those structures inhibit Agile quite a bit, I see in certain companies, which is you're trying to go form a crew of people, and those managers sometimes don't know how to step out of the way and say that they're a member of that new team that just doesn't happen to fit into what we would traditionally think is an org structure.
Yeah, that having people outside of the org structure, especially in a company that's recently been very siloed by skill sets or development sections, can be difficult to get them to let go of their team members and not give them permission to not participate in the cross-functional team.
Right. Carlos, what do you have? I notice you have your hand up now.
It's a comment about the discussion. I believe, and I put in the chat, I believe that one of the marks of the responsibility as a coach is have the capability to observe the context and understand the context. And previous to that, understand what is the value and the principles of the team that they define as understanding their auto-government in order to ensure that they're making independent and they create a cohesive, safe environment. And in that context, we could define which of the different frameworks could be better, because the framework is not good or is bad as per se. Only need a context in order to be appropriate for use.
Very good point. And we are now at the top of the hour. Thank you for your final thoughts there. And thank you everyone on the call for this month. Great conversations. I really enjoyed it. If you guys want to come visit me, or if you guys want to go to a great event, probably be a better way of saying it, I'll be over at Agile Open Northwest in Portland, Oregon on February 6th through the 8th. Come over and visit me. I'll be a participant, so we can just sit down and grab a Post-it note and just put up on there, let's go jam about some of the great stuff that we talk about on this call, or any of the other types of great sessions that we might have at these great open space events. Also coming up in March, I will be at Agile India. I'll be manning the Agile Alliance booth. If you're there, please stop by, have a conversation with me. Love to know more about your company. And with that concludes our call for this month. I look forward to talking to you guys soon. This podcast is provided by the Agile Alliance for educational and informative purposes only. To find out more information about the member-supported Agile Alliance, please go to agilealliance.org to find out about more upcoming events, as well as different programs that are available to help you with your Agile journey.